All right. Well, thanks for holding on for us there for a short little bit. Hope everyone's doing all right this morning. My name's Andrew Koulis. I'm one of the technical advisors for Mastercam for in-house solutions specific. I'm one of the guys that you often will end up talking to on the phone when you end up calling in for tech support, as well as often the guy coming on site to help you guys out and things like that when things go awry. I also have my colleague Drew Pastrozny here with me. He's the solutions consultant for in-house solutions. So if any of you have had any demos or had anything like that when dealing with your sales reps recently, he's the guy that you're talking to and dealing with. So today we're going to walk you through what's new in 2021, specifically for the Mill and Mill 3D license. Okay, so just to start us off real quick, all we're going to do is essentially I'm just going to walk us through the agenda and just some quick housekeeping before I pass it off to Drew. So what we're going to do is we are going to go over updates to the interface, what's new within Toolpath for Mill and Mill 3D, as well as some new Toolpath enhancements, and we'll go over some licensing features as well that's new with 2021. Okay. So on the right side there, everyone is muted currently, so you don't have to stress about whether or not we can hear you or what kind of stuff you're saying about us. Totally fine. But yeah, you are muted currently. If you have any questions during the webinar here, we do want to hear them. Please feel free. You can raise your hands. You see the little hand raise button there on your right-hand side, the control panel, and there is a questions area as well, which during it, both Drew and I will be going through and answering the questions as they come in, and we will also have a question and answer period at the end of this webinar. So feel free to go ahead and ask your questions, and we'll either address them at the time or we'll address them at the end there. Lastly, the webinar is being recorded. So please feel free, if there's any of your colleagues who weren't able to view this that you think would want to, you can let us know. You can just shoot us a message in the questions area, in the chat area, and we'll be sure to get that link to you. Okay. Just to make sure everyone can hear me all right, can you go ahead and try and raise your hand for me? Perfect, and I see some hands raised there. That's great. You can go ahead and put those hands down. I'll just actually do that for you there. All right, fantastic. So we'll just jump right in. With Mastercam 2021, it's always the feature of people always question with new updates and new releases. Well, what is new? It doesn't seem like, I've just opened it up, downloaded it, and it looks like the same old interface. So this is a quick list I kind of threw together of absolutely everything that's new within Mastercam 2021. This actually isn't covering absolutely everything. This is just a lot of the main features here. So here's just a quick list of 51 items right there. Now this is relative to not just the Mill 3D, but it's relative to all licenses, all features within Mastercam. So today we're not going to go through that many. However, we do have quite a list to jump through and just kind of show you what's new and maybe some tips and tricks that you guys can utilize in your shop. So yeah, we'll go through about, give or take, about 33 of those features. And so with that, we'll start off with the interface, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Drew to jump on in.
Yep, so the first change to our interface, in previous versions, we always had mirroring of the geometry by quadrants. So if you wanted to mirror in the X and Y, you had to mirror first once in the X, and then for the second time in the Y. Now there's an option in 2021 that you can now mirror in both X and Y in one step. So as you can see there in the top left, they mirrored in the Y, and then they mirrored in the X. But on the right hand side there, you can, by choosing X and Y axis, it'll do both at the same time to give you one part. So it kind of cuts out just the two added steps. Second thing, sometimes a lot of people would complain about how the prompts would cover a large portion of their screen. By right-clicking on a prompt and choosing to auto-hide, and it will minimize it down to just the first line. and when you mouse over that prompt, it will expand to show you the full line. So if it's getting in your way, you can tell it auto hide that. And now we're just going to get that first line that you can mouse over and see the whole thing if you do need to see what's actually being said. Bounding box wrap. So now instead of doing just a rectangular or cylindrical bounding area, you can create a wrap shape. You can choose between a simple silhouette, which is going to give us our one there on the very right-hand side where it's kind of a 2D shape, but with some depth to it. And then, or we can do a minimum volume wrap, which blankets the part rather than just giving the profile and thickness. Very useful for stock models and safety zones in the multi-axis operations. With that, you can also set an additional offset. So if you wanted to have that best fit, but also add in 125 thou to offset away from your part, you can do that as well. Bounding box auto axis. So when creating a bounding box, you can now choose between auto orientation, allowing Mastercam to determine the best orientation for the shape to fit the selected features. The benefit of this is you can use that feature to best fit to the part to an axis, even when it is a difficult part that would normally be almost impossible to orient properly. And so now the Mastercam will give you an option to save as a 3D PDF. So this allows anyone with Adobe to view the 3D part along with the toolpaths and wireframe. Any toolpaths that are checked off and any solid levels that are turned on will be saved as a PDF from the model tree. And I believe Andrew has a sample of this to show us right now. So in the past, some of you guys used our home learning edition to be able to view what's going on the shop floor. This is now another good alternative to kind of see your geometry, your toolpaths as applies to that. Andrew, can maybe turn off that top piece there? So we can turn off and on all of our geometry levels as well as our toolpath levels to have a look at what toolpaths are being ran and how the geometry tree is being affected there. So much like a zip-to-go file, the Mastercam content file is a one-click option for placing all of your post and machine definition files in the correct place while opening the part. This is great for transferring posts around the shop if you guys aren't using a server location for that. So basically by dragging this new file type onto your desktop and clicking on it, it's going to auto-place everything into your Mastercam setup files, so you don't have to worry about undoing the zip to go and moving everything into the correct folder. It removes that the need to do that for you.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt here. I do see we have Savas. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing the name wrong there, but I see you have your hand raised. Did you question, or was that just from the very beginning there? I'll unmute you there so you can talk.
Yeah, it was in the very beginning. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. No worries.
It looks hand down though.
All right, I'll throw that down for you.
Okay, so one of the new, another new feature is quick plane. So when you're sketching out simple features or holes on a part and you don't want to necessarily create a whole new plane for this, you now have a new quick plane option, which allows you to create a plane off of a solid face temporarily for basically drafting purposes, the plane will not be saved. So, Andrew, if you could move to the next slide. So basically, by clicking on any face, it's going to create a plane on that face. However, it's not actually going to save that plane, so you cannot. It can be used for creating wireframe and geometry. It cannot be used for toolpath creation or tool orientation. It is something that even myself, I kind of was like, well, where am I going to really use that? And if you ever come across like a solid where you needed to add, say, a countersunk hole on top of a hole, but you didn't already have a plane on that surface, this actually does come in handy for something like that. In the past, we have always had the ability to click and drag with the divide tool, at least since 2017. However, even though not many people were aware of it, now in the 2021 release, they have expanded that capability to be used with the fillet and chamfer tool as well as the divide tool.
So yeah, essentially just with the drag click, all you're doing is clicking and dragging your mouse over top of the features themselves. So rather than utilizing divide and clicking the individual features or anything like that, and likewise with fillet or chamfer, instead of clicking on the two entities, you can now, in the past, you've been able to do this with divide for, I believe, since 2017. However, they've just introduced this with fillet and chamfer as well, where you can just click, drag your mouse over top of it. Continuing on, essentially, with the surfacing, what's new with the surfacing is they've introduced both the edit and the reflow UV for flow line surfaces. Where this is big is essentially you can see on the top and the bottom there. The top is our original surface that's created. The bottom is after editing and reflowing it. So essentially what we're doing there is we are recreating the surface, and what that's actually doing for us is while toolpathing, it's actually giving us a much smoother toolpath, much smoother logic. And I'm not sure if any of you have had this issue or had this in the past, but when you're doing, especially this happened to me all the time when utilizing our legacy flowline toolpath for doing machining a simple fillet or chamfer or anything like that, you can now go ahead and essentially just reflow all the surfaces together. So rather than having numerous surfaces machining across and then you'd all of a sudden hit one surface that was machining along, now they'll all machine across smoothly, nicely for you. So with the reflow, essentially takes the original, reflows it, allows you to select the boundary curves, and that's what's going to deem how it's going to reflow that surface along. And also, as you can see on the bottom there, you can select the number of U and V flow lines to create. And then with the edit surface, UV surfaces, this is where it comes in handy, where you can just simply swap. I can completely reverse my U and my V, or I can swap an individual U direction or V direction. If you're watching, you going, Andrew, what the heck is a U and V? I don't know. I just create a surface and it does it. Essentially, that's what deems the direction. It's like a surface normal, if you will, almost, where it deems the direction of how the surface is created and how it toolpaths. So being able to swap that prior to toolpathing is a major benefit when working with surface models, just to ease the toolpath use. Okay. Continuing on, one new thing we have when creating in the past, on the left-hand side there, you see the hole command. Again, that's been with us for a little while now. But one thing they have added in is the ability to do custom holes. So in the past, in our templates, we could do a counterbore, countersink, tapered hole, anything like that. Now you can also, you can also just create a custom hole. Where this also comes in handy is, I used to have all the time while in industry, customer would send it a part and it would have this custom porthole that would constantly show up in various other areas. Well, if I don't have the history to this part, I can also, under my model prep tab, click on add history and create the history for it. So history is created on part with no, or model prep is used on a part with no history to it. So giving the ability to do this saves a lot of time in determining what are the individual depths and angles and all that of all the various different features of that hole. So as you can see here, what I did was I added history to that hole, selected it as finding a hole operation rather than extrusion or fillet or anything. And after doing so, it selected my hole style as custom and entered in all my parameters for me relative to the hole that was just seen there. I can then go and I can save that hole out. As you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, I can save that hole out as a specific type. So I just created a new category called portholes by clicking on the green plus on the right-hand side there. And then on the very bottom for my presets, I click on the green plus again, and you can name it whatever you want. So if it's a specific port, whatever its designation may be, you can save it as that to utilize in future parts down the road, not just within this one Mastercam file. So a real benefit to being able to create custom holes when doing any kind of fixturing, modifying parts, or anything like that. And here I just have a quick video essentially showing just that. So into modify, I added the history. I can see that it's set as a hole operation, which is good. It lets me know, great, we've detected one hole in there, and it's added it to my solids list. So if I just take a look, I can see all of the information given there. And under my template, all I'll do is I'll click on that plus to create a new category, and I'll just call it portholes. And then under my presets, I'll just go ahead and I'll name it. In this case, I'm just going to call it porthole 1, but you would name it whatever designation is going to work out for you in the future. And now if I head over to my solids tab, I can create a new hole, select my position, and under my templates, I can now see porthole is now the option for the style, and that porthole that I created is there for me. All right. One of the last, not least, certainly not least things to the interface that they've introduced is in the past we've had check holder. Now what check holder did was it essentially just checked with for interference with the part against the holder utilizing the check holder tool. Now check tool reach not only checks the holder versus the part, but also checks tool lengths, shank sizes, different things like that to make sure, essentially just giving us a color coordinated map, heat map, if you will, showing, hey, here's where your tool will be able to reach and here's where it will not be able to reach on your part, just with the tool lengths you have set as well as with the holders that you're utilizing. So the check tool reach will utilize both the holder and the tool, whereas the check holder will just utilize the holder. Now this check tool reach will work against solid surfaces and meshes. So you're pretty much clear for whatever type of model you want to utilize. For obvious reasons, the only thing it doesn't go against is wireframe because it has no depth really variance to it. All right. Lastly, we have the improvements to the solid chain dialog box. Now, in case anyone is still utilize anything from 2019 or older, if anyone's using 2020, you'll recognize this page here, where we've made some improvements to the solid chaining dialog box, where they've introduced, you have open edges, outer edges, bosses, and cavities, with the ability to select for cavities. You can select the drop down there to select whether or not you want all cavities, blind cavities, or through cavities. Now, this is super handy when you're utilizing various different tool paths. So things such as, the dynamic one is one I use this all the time. However, with that, there was two annoyances. For one, you always have, as you can see in the box with the loop there, you always have that pick reference face, this face to the other face pop up. Which was, I don't know about you guys, but that was annoying to me to all regard, having to constantly click that off. So no longer in 2021 and going forward will you see that pick reference face dialog box pop up, asking you to select which face you're referencing. That's gone. It's automatically referencing it. The other improvement they've made is with in order to select, as you can see on the image on the right hand side, if I want to select the remaining surfaces there, or the remaining faces, sorry, of my model, I'm essentially left with only partial loop, where I have to do a partial loop for each individual remaining face. We have the option for open edges to give us our air regions, if you will, for dynamic. But if I'm going to utilize a dynamic on this part, and I recognize that that's a roughing operation, I'm going to need to do maybe a contour toolpath just to finish these walls off. Well, now I'm left with selecting each of these in a partial loop, and it's time consuming. So in 2021, they've done away with the outer edges, and what they've done now is they've introduced outer shared edges. So as you can see on the image on the right there, all we're doing essentially is we're selecting that face, and automatically it will select those outer shared edges for you. So not only do you have the open edges, but you also have the outer shared edges. So you can click all remaining, in a single click, you can grab all remaining edges. Now also, like the solid chaining selections in the past, as you click it, everything is automatically chained for climb milling, so in the correct direction. So if you have 1,000 faces, you don't have to stress about, oh yeah, but 43 of the 1,000 faces are in the wrong direction. I now have to go and reverse the arrows for those. No, everything is automatically selected for climb milling, so you're good that way. Same will be true for, obviously in the past, for your open air regions. Okay. Now, in order to remove that constant, this face or the other face box, what Mastercam is doing is when you're selecting your outer edges, that's just going to be incorporated into the loop feature in the top right there, as you can see. So as I select loop, I'm going to just drag my mouse close to the edge that I want. And relative to the face that I'm actually selecting, as my mouse is getting close, I'm going to see my outer edge highlighted in green there, that complete loop that I'm looking for. And relative to the side of the edge that my mouse is hovering over, that's going to be relative to what face I'm actually grabbing the loop on. So all you're focusing on is making sure that your mouse is clear to where you want it, and that the correct face is highlighted in the green. The other thing you now have the ability of is when chaining with wireframe in the past, we had this dynamic start and end option for us, but we haven't had it in solid chaining. So they've improved that feature there, where we now have a dynamic start and end to it, where if you haven't used that feature, it can be rather handy in certain times. Where I just threw it on this chain here, where all I'm really doing is I'll click on the dynamic start, click on my green arrow, and I can adjust it to where I want. Same thing, click on the dynamic start or stop, click on my red arrow, and I can adjust it. So rather than having it start and end only at the beginning and end of that chain, I can select my chain, but I can then go and I can specify exactly where on that chain I want my toolpath, or whatever the case is that I'm doing, I want it to end. So it can be really, really handy for your finishing operations when you're just trying to machine out a certain area, maybe making sure you're hitting those avoidance or not hitting those avoidance areas with your tool, stopping short, various things like that. So it just gives you the option of, rather than selecting in your lead in, lead out, shorten by, and taking a quick guess of, well, it's probably going to be about, whatever, 82% of my cutter randomly, you can go ahead and just specify specifically exactly where you want to start and end. All right. So with that being said, we're going to jump into our toolpath updates. So first and foremost being the face mill roll-in. Now this was actually something that was incorporated into Mastercam as a result of requests by the tooling suppliers. So what this is actually doing is, as you can see there on your facing toolpath parameter page on the cut parameters, you have a roll-in option. there where you can check it or uncheck it, whether or not you want it. If it's unchecked, you get the result on the top. If it's checked off, you get the result on the bottom. So what this is doing for me is essentially giving me either full engagement or partial engagement right away, or gradual, I should say. So if I just play my video here, right away, you're going to see right there, I'm just hitting full engagement onto my cutter. It's great, it's going to do it. But if I enable my roll in, what I'm actually getting is gradual engagement onto my part. So as you can see, my part, my tool fully engaging versus gradual engagement there coming in from the side of my cutter into the full. So it's just a little easier for your cutters. It's a little more desirable for the tooling suppliers, what they suggest in terms of a method for entering in on a face mill toolpath, and just a little less harsh on those inserts. So if any of you are dealing with any harder materials, any of your Hasteloys, any whatever it may be, stainless parts, and chip cutters, chip inserts are something that you're constantly trying to avoid and constantly battling with. This may be something to look into. Next would be the chamfer drill toolpath. So the chamfer drill toolpath is essentially, it's taking place of, in the past, what we would do if we were going to chamfer this part is we would do a normal drill toolpath, and we would utilize the calculator within my linking parameter depths there to figure out, okay, what's the final depth I want to hit based off of this tool and this geometry of my tool with my flat and my yada, yada, yada. The only downside of that is in doing it that way, I can only toolpath for one size hole at a time. What the chamfer drill toolpath is doing is it's actually taking the effort out of chamfering multiple holes at once for you, where the only real parameter to enter in, as you can see here, is what's the depth or width, your choice, of the chamfer that you're wanting to add in, and how long do you want to dwell. And what it's going to do is it's going to take the size of that cutter and the flat on the tool that you've selected. If it's a true chamfer mill, or if it's a spot drill, there won't be much of a flat. There'll still be a tiny little land. But relative to those flats, it'll automatically determine, okay, how deep do I need to go for each hole? So as you can see in the image on the left-hand side there, we have selected a couple different size holes in this. So in doing so, within one toolpath, it'll automatically chamfer all the holes for you. So this is super handy when you're just doing a simple edge break operation where you just want to break your edges, 10, 15 thou type thing, irrelevant of the hole size. And what's actually going to happen is, if by chance I select a hole, let's say just for example, I select a 1/2 inch chamfer drill and I have a hole that's 5/8 big. Obviously I can't just do a drilling operation to spot a 5/8 hole with a 1/2 inch center drill, center drill, or chamfer drill, sorry. So it's just going to go ahead and skip over that hole. So if you've selected any hole that's too big for that tool, it'll just skip over it and continue on with the rest. It's not going to error out, not do anything. It's smart enough to say, okay, well, I recognize I can't do this one. And likewise, if it's too small with the size of the land and such, it'll just skip over those holes and continue on. So that's the new chamfer drill operation, just making your life a lot easier than having to utilize that drill operation every time. Okay. Next up, one of the big guys is the advanced drill operation. So the advanced drill operation, in a scenario like this, or another scenario that we get often calls about at in-house, is customers who are drilling through tubing or anything like that. So if I'm drilling through and I want to drill both those holes from this one side, what's happening is, in the past, I could only utilize my normal drill operation, where if I'm doing a G81 or a peck or anything like that, I'm either pecking through the entire thing and just wasting time while going through that middle air region before I start pecking through the bottom again. The advanced drill operation gives me the option to essentially select each individual depth and specify what my tool is doing in each depth. So I can say, during this first depth, I want my tool to drill right through, or maybe I'll peck during the first depth for whatever reason. Quite often on a long drill series, the tooling supplier suggests you actually go with a lot slower RPM, a slower feed rate until you get to a certain depth, and then ramp that up and ramp both your feed rate and your spindle speed up as you're drilling right through. So even if it's a solid part, you'll want various speeds and feeds. So this gives you the ability to peck through certain areas, rapid through others, and then just drill through others or anything like that, while incorporating various different spindle speeds, coolant modes, anything like that. So here's a quick picture of the parameter page for you, where I'm essentially just selecting each depth. And within each depth on the bottom there, you can see the segment peck. So it looks like for my first one there, I have a 20 thou peck for my segment. I'm doing it 2000 RPM with, I was dumb enough just to leave all my coolant off, but I can go ahead and specify what types of coolant I want, whether that be through coolant, you know, whatever, a mist, blast, whatever it be, or flood. You can specify individual coolants, individual RPMs, and individual feed rates and dwells and all that for each area. So for my second depth there, you can see I'm essentially just not really rapiding down, but I'm going much faster at 50 inches a minute down through that open air region until I get to my next land, in which case I slow my feed rate back down. All the while, I end up ramping my RPM up from 2,000 to 2.5. So a much better option than in the past. Essentially, the only other option was just programming this as 2 different tool paths, 2 different drill cycles. And I never personally enjoyed doing that while in industry, just because rapiding through that tool hole was always something that made you know, my butt cheeks pucker a little bit as I was standing there in front of the machine, hoping my tool wasn't going to catch on anything and end up snapping. Okay. Now the question often comes, well, Andrew, how does this come out? Like, what kind of can cycle is this, or how does this look? Essentially, because there is no can cycle that can obviously handle something like this, what will happen is it'll post all this information out in longhand form for you for the whole. Okay. Next, a nice simple improvement. So for helix bore and circle mill in the past, we've always been able to end at center, or start at center, sorry, but ending at center wasn't an option. So I simply added that option in for you, so you can both start and end at the center of your hole, your feature that you're selecting. So for both your circle mill and your helix bore, your circle mill just found under the transitions there tab, and your helix bore found under the cut parameters. Okay. Now, one of the features that I utilize all the time now, being arc fit my maximum radius and outputting as a feed rate. So when you're really trying to trim out, if this is, you know, if we're doing numerous parts and we're really trying to trim out the time, rather than just having it wrap it up, wrap it over, wrap it down, I can choose to have arc fit a maximum radius. So on the right-hand side there, you can see rather than having just a couple linear moves, I actually get radiuses input in my X, Y, and Z just to trim out that time. Now, it looks like you go, well, Andrew, you know, how much time is that really going to save? When you're dealing with large parts and large cycle times, it actually becomes significant where you're saving out, you know, on an hour cycle time, I can be saving out 3, 4, 5 minutes in doing so, depending on the number of passes and what's going on. So 3, 4, 5 minutes can end up really adding up over the number of parts you're doing. Now, the other benefit we have is by outputting as a feed move. So as you can see, just on the link parameter page, the option for this is just at the top there. Checking off outputting your arc fit as a maximum radius. You can enter in the radius, and you can also check off the output feed move and enter in the feed rate. So why you would want to output it as a feed move rather than a rapid is essentially to avoid dog legs. So this is common on older machines, where if we're trying to go from point A to point B, in theory, what's going to happen, and quite often what Mastercam will just show, is just a linear interpolated move. So it's just going from point A to point B. However, if my machine is not capable of doing that in a rapid motion, what it's going to do is those yellow arrows. It's going to give us a dogleg motion, where it's going to give us, say, for example, a XZ move before going in my Y, or whatever the case may be. In this case, a YZ move before going in the X. And the danger of that, obviously, is if we have any kind of part or fixture or anything like that in that path, we've just gouged our part. And so we get calls on tech support all the time of people calling in and saying, "Hey, Andrew, or hey, support, it gouged my part here, but I don't know why. It's not showing it in my verify. It doesn't show it in Mastercam. What's wrong? What's happening?" It's essentially just a limitation of that older machine. So what we can do to avoid that is on those machines, when it cannot make that move in a G00, it can make that move in a G01. So by changing it to a feed move rather than a rapid move, we can avoid the risk of that. So if I check off output as feed move and I can enter in obviously a very high feed rate here, I'm going 350 inches a minute, essentially rapiding. I'm now removing the risk of my tool gouging in anywhere on my part. So just a great tool that's added in just for safety's sake. Again, on a lot of these older machines that are still kicking around. Okay. Next up is going to be our high-speed blend toolpath. Now, our high-speed blend toolpath has got a lot of updates to it. In the past, it's been a nice legacy toolpath, and it got a little bit of a facelift in the 2020 release. However, a lot of the background parameters and such, it was more of a preliminary. They gave it a little bit of a facelift before really going in and scrubbing away a lot of the excess stuff. So you did have this newer looking interface in the parameter pages in 2020. However, it was only a 2D projection and didn't have a lot of the options that we now have. So those options being, as I just mentioned, your projection, you now have both a 2D and a 3D projection option. I can go for my step overs rather than just selecting based off a step over of whatever it may be, 10 thou, 15, 20 thou, blah, 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 or specifying specific scallop height. I can just go and I can specify by number of passes. So I can say, hey, I don't know what the pass is. Maybe it's just a roughing and I don't really care, but just give me 25 passes in this case between my two chains. We also have the option, instead of the classics one-way zigzag up or down mill, we also have the two options of from center or to the center. So essentially we'll just go and we'll machine to the center of the part rather than coming from one side and just machining to the other. So you have those options there. So as I mentioned, in that blend in 2020, you'll notice that the project 2D will still be there, but if you hit that drop down arrow, there was nothing else. It just said you just had the option of 2D. That was just in preparation for the knowledge that we were going to the 3D projection option. So you now have that 3D projection option within 2021, where essentially the difference between those two being in 2D, it just keeps the passes equidistant in the C-plane, in the cutting plane. Whereas in 3D, it keeps the passes equidistant in your 3D mode. So along the actual face there, adding cuts in steep areas. So on very different parts, if I just go back here real quick to that part there, as I'm heading down that wall on either side with that little hump in the middle there, if I were to machine across, it'll actually add passes or it'll squish them together a little more to make sure that I'm hitting my tolerances, my equal finish all the way around. Okay. The last thing that they added in there to it was just giving you some advantages to, do you want to contain at the tooltip or at the tool contact point? So in the past, being the legacy toolpath, you couldn't control this. It was always essentially just at the tooltip that it calculated off of. So now they also give you the option of calculating to the tool contact point, which was always my preferred. Okay. For thread mill improvements, a small improvement, but a handy one. So essentially what they've done is they've given you just these little lock features. So rather than everything you're doing within your thread mill toolpath, as I'm selecting various different tools or various things like that, it'll automatically update my number of teeth and my pitch and all that. By hitting that lock button, what I'm doing is Mastercam won't recalculate out the number of active teeth of my thread pitch relative to the various other information I'm entering into the toolpath. So this is handy when I'm doing something like if I'm trying to machine if I have an insert with 3 teeth, and I'm machining a thread with half that pitch out of it. So quick example, if it's a 12 pitch insert, and I'm going to machine a thread with a 24 pitch on it, obviously you can do that with that insert. You're just half in the pitch there of what it's designed for, and it'll come out perfect. So it gives you the ability to, I can set it accordingly and then lock it so that when I select these various tools, it's not going to adjust or give me any issues with that. Okay. Next up is within our good old-fashioned contour toolpath, one of the most used toolpaths within Mastercam. So on the left-hand side, just showing in the past again, for the longest time, we could always kind of swap right and left when we're entering in our various different values. So if I give myself, an arc of 30% with a sweep angle of 25 degrees and a length of whatever, 25% or whatever the case is, and I want to move that to the right or swap it over. But I don't know how many times I've had in the past where if I have a scenario like I see on the left where I have different values on my left hand and my right hand side, I can swap my right side to the left, and then I just have to re-enter in my 50%, 50% on the right hand side. You now have the option of just clicking that swap back and forth button on the bottom there, and it will reverse it automatically for you. It'll just take all the information on the right, throw it on the left, and all the information on the left, throw it on the right. Okay. They've also given the option of, rather than just tangent or perpendicular, you can also now do a profile ramp. So I'll actually ramp into the part, but following the profile of the chain you've selected itself. So you may think and you go, well, couldn't you have just done that before with tangent and enter in a ramp height or anything? To an extent, if that length exceeded the chain, then it would essentially just cut that lead in or lead out short, and wouldn't do it. So now it's actually going to follow along the chain as it ramps in to your various angle. Okay. Within multi-passes, again, within your contour, and many of the, this is not really actually just a contour improvement, but this is in anywhere where you have your spring passes, you now have the ability to apply to all finish passes for your spring passes. So in the past, any spring passes you did would only apply to your final depth there, which was super handy to have spring passes if you're not sure what a spring pass is. Essentially, it's just one extra pass, theoretically cutting nothing. But as machinists, what we often know is if we're dealing with small tools, i.e., let's say we're cutting a profile with a 1/8 end mill, and just because of the depth I need to go, it's hanging out pretty far. I'm going to have some deflection issues. And so the path that I'm creating, because my tool is deflecting or bending, if you will, I end up with a tapered pocket. So by having a spring pass, cutting one more time around, or two more, however many times I want, cutting theoretically nothing, it's just removing the rest of that material for me. So rather than applying that only to the very bottom, I can now apply that to all finish passes, whether it be all depths, or just in between, for every third depth or whatever I have selected under my finish path parameters on the bottom there, right below that. Next up, within OptiRough, they've made some improvements here. So within our toolpath control area, we have this new skip pockets option. So what this is going to do is, as I'm actually machining out my part, as you can see on the right-hand side, I have a few different pockets in this area, or in this part, where it's helixing into. I have two options. I have either skip all or skip smaller than. So by saying skip all, what's actually going to happen, I believe I have, yeah, there we go. By saying skip all, I'm just avoiding those altogether. So I'm going to OptiRough my part, but as I get to those through pockets, it's just not going to machine them. It's going to leave them for a later operation. So if you actually take a look at this part on the top half of it there, I have 3 small through pockets as well as kind of a step down. So what's actually happening is it is machining that step down, but those through pockets, it's actually avoiding. Okay? Rather than if I say skip smaller than, what's happening is it's by saying, hey, you know what, skip smaller than 300% of my tool. What's happening is I'm now going and I'm going to machine my middle area there. I'm going to machine my main pocket on the top half there. But because those three smaller pockets are smaller than that 2¼ inch size, it's going to avoid those again for a later, assuming I'm going to do that with a smaller tool maybe later on down the road. Okay. Next improvement we have is within our raster toolpath. So within raster in the past, essentially you could select the angle of, hey, what angle are you going? It was just a matter of essentially enter in an angle, generate it, and see, oh, how did that come out? How does that look? But relative to where the feature is on the part, sometimes it can be a little difficult to kind of guess what angle is best and such. So they've introduced the option of automatic. So by saying automatic, what it's going to do is it's now going to calculate, it's going to give Mastercam the ability, to calculate the best angle for that selected surface. So it's essentially going to maximize the length of the cut pattern while minimizing the connection moves. So the next slide here, I essentially have a quick visual example of what that's actually doing. So on my custom, as you can see, it's just spitting out, give or take, out 45 degrees type idea, entering in as that. So every surface I have selected there is coming out at 45 degrees. Whereas when I set it to automatic, it's automatically going to select or analyze each one of those individual surfaces and automatically figure out what's the best angle based off the lengths and such of that surface. So I'm going to get the smoothest tool path and just the best finish essentially for it. Okay. Within my 3D tool enhancements, we now have the option in our linking parameters to both extend out our lead in and lead out features, as well as we can apply transitions. So essentially what this is doing is the extension parameter will extend the lead in and lead out motion by the given amount you give in a tangential line. And the transitions parameter will, when that's checked off, it'll utilize the values in the linking parameters leads during the transition motions. So whether you have that extension there with a high-speed loop or whatever the case is, it'll apply that to the individual transitions. So where you have, rather than just at the very beginning and end of the toolpath, it'll apply it to all the areas in between where it's doing a quick transition from one path to the next. Okay. Last but not least, I want to throw this in. Now, this is not relative to Mill 3D toolpath. This is a multi-axis toolpath that's become available. But I want to make sure just to show it to you guys, just because it is really handy for those with rotary axes and things like that. Or if you do have a 5-axis, fantastic. Essentially what it is the new 3+2 auto roughing toolpath. So what the auto roughing toolpath is going to do is when I select my part, I select my machining regions and things like that, and I can specify what planes I want to rough it from. So I can just have it say automatic. Now automatic would essentially be, if I just go to the next page here, I have 3 different options for my tool axis control: manual, semi-automatic, or automatic. Automatic will be a lot more so for 5-axis type motion. So that if any of you have any kind of multi-axis machines, what that's going to do for you is, rather than while I'm in my roughing operation, creating my various different planes to come in and rough from, it'll automatically just figure those out for me and incorporate them all to within the one toolpath. Same thing for the semi-automatic and the manual. So for semi-automatic and manual, it gives me the ability to grab individual planes. So for this one here, I just grab my top, front, bottom, back plane as I would in a rotary type motion. And I can go and I can actually say, okay, great, machine in this order, so that what it's doing is it gives me that auto roughed feature. So by the time it's done roughing from each of those sides, I end up having my part relatively roughed out to the geometry I've selected. So it just saves you from doing multiple plane creation is the real benefit of it. taking that work away from you. But just want to mention that is a new toolpath available within the multi-axis options. Okay, so that's what's new with our toolpaths. Now I'm just going to jump over to talk briefly about the licensing. So many of you will probably have the HASP and the NetHASP available or still in your shops with for your license, what's held on your license. Now these are great, but they're becoming a little archaic in terms of just the feature of them. So as of last year, we've introduced what we refer to as software licensing. So more and more software options or software packages are going to be moving this route. So we're jumping on the bandwagon as well and giving that option. So rather than having these HASPs that end up getting broken, end up getting damaged, various different things like that, as you know, ports die out, you have to constantly swap them, various different things like that, or they get brought home by programmers and forgotten there, and now you can't continue to program. You now have the option of a software license. So you can either have a software or individual or a software network license, which essentially acts the exact same way as a HASP or NetHASP. However, the difference is the software license is just put right onto the server or individual computer, and there's no USB to worry about. So everything is held within your code meter center. Now, this is where you often held the codes for your add-ons like Milturn and various different things like that. Now, the benefit of software, especially in a time like this, as we're all going through COVID and various things like that, and a lot of people are starting to work from home, especially as programmers, what this has introduced and opened up the window for is license borrowing. So this has been something that's been requested for ages and ages that we have finally introduced. So this will be available to customers, to you guys, as of update 2. And essentially what it does is it gives individuals the opportunity to go in and check out various different licenses. So I can open up my Mastercam license borrowing utility, as you can see here, and I can check off if I want to grab out, let's say, one of my Mastercam Mill 3D licenses. I'm going to be doing some programming on a 3D part, so I can check that license out. And as I'm borrowing it, if I say as I check it off on the bottom right there, I'll click on Borrow Licenses. And it gives me the option to specify how long do I want to borrow it for. Do you want it for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days? I know that says 30. It's actually been brought down. It's a maximum of 10 days right now is how we're starting out. So you have the option of borrowing it up to 10 days before you would need to recheck out that license. And you can enter in a decimal place there. So you're not limited to a single day borrow. You can borrow it out for an hour, for a couple hours, for half hour, whatever the case is, just by entering in the decimal point there. So once it is borrowed, some questions we've gotten from customers is, well, you know, what if it's not checked back in? What if it's not put back into or, you know, given back? Well, essentially at the end of that time period, so if I say 7 days for a quick example, at the end of the 7 days, if I have it on my computer, once that 7-day time period ends, it'll automatically uncheck, like I'll lose that license. I won't be able to program with it anymore. And it'll automatically become available again in the host server. So it's not like you've lost it forever or anything like that if a computer checks it out and crashes or something to that extent. You haven't lost that license. There's nothing you need to do that way. Worst case scenario is it's lost for the number of days that it's been borrowed out for. Okay, so once I've borrowed it, I can just utilize it and just let that time period end. Or option 2 would be I can go ahead and return it. So just simply, if I head back to my page there, you'll see I have a borrow tab and a return tab. I can head back to my return tab, check off what I want to check back in. In this case, if I had checked out both my CATIA and my Mastercam Mill 3D, I can check that out and say return, and it'll spit it back into my server. So as I'm checking things out, it will let me know, hey, you're attempting to borrow, you know, these licenses. Are you sure? Just to make sure that I'm not stealing things from the server that I didn't mean to, in terms of, oh, I accidentally grabbed the multi-axis seat as well, or anything like that. And it will also prompt you to let you know, hey, there's only one seat of Mill3D left. Are you sure you want to take it? Yes, absolutely. Let everyone else use the 2D. But it'll prompt you for that. Okay, so again, yeah, this is available for customers, for you guys, with update 2, which should be coming in the next 2 to 3 months. And right now it is just beta that's released. So the only limitations to it are, unfortunately, is not available currently at this time for educational licenses, but it is available for everyone else. So any customers out there who are having the issue where you're having people program from home, and maybe VPNing is too slow or anything like that, this is the great option for you. And again, this is only available for customers with a software license. If you have the HASP and the NetHASP still, this will not be available. It is only for a network software license. And if this is something that interests you, I would just reach out to your sales rep, let them know that you saw this and that this is something you definitely want to look into, and they can let you know about the options for swapping over to a software license rather than your HASP. The last thing I'll essentially mention with the software licenses versus the HASPs is, with software licenses, you are limited out to, you can only use versions as far back as 2019. So if you still have some guys in your shop who are, I know we have various different customers out there. If you have some guys within your shop who are still using older versions, various different things like that, then you can, there would not be able to use, say, X9 or X8 or X7 or anything like that, or anything else, sorry, for that matter, 2017-18, on the software license. They can only utilize those on a HASP or NetHASP. So if you do have people utilizing those older versions, you would have to stay on the HASP or NetHASP for now until they suck it up and jump on board with the newer versions. But yeah, it is a fantastic feature to have available now. With that said, we will, that's essentially all we have to share for now for what's new in for Mastercam 2021. So I'd love to open it up to Q&A. I know a lot of webinars I've jumped on, they kind of end this off right away. Any questions? No? Okay, let's end. So I'll give you guys a few minutes. If you want, you can go ahead and type any questions you have into the questions prompt or the chat area there, and we'd be happy to answer them out. Otherwise, Drew, did you have any questions pop in? I'm not sure if Drew's... I've just unmuted Drew.
Yeah, so
yes.
Just wait to see what questions we get, and then we actually do have a couple of questions that we get asked on a regular basis that we would like to go over.
Yeah, sure. What ones in particular?
So the first one is, what's the benefit of creating stock models?
Stock models. Stock models are often referred to as the most underutilized feature of Mastercam. So when creating a stock model, sorry, I'm just gonna escape out of this so I can jump into my Mastercam here. There we go. So when creating a stock model, if I just grab a quick machine here, you can utilize this stock model for various different things. So whether it be just to utilize as a stock setup, to utilize in your stock setup. When I'm creating my stock setups, I can reference various different stock models or anything like that, meshes via mesh features. I can also utilize it in verification. So if it's something like I'm creating a casting, if I'm working off a casting and I don't have the model for that casting, and I know, okay, well, let's say I have, give or take, an extra 1/8 inch all around, or 1/4 inch, whatever the case may be, 100 thou. I can create a stock model, and much like Drew referred to earlier with the bounding box, we can go and we can say, okay, great, make a casting model based off this solid model, but add out 100 thou for me. And I can now reference that as my casting for my stock setup. The other thing we can utilize it for, if I just do a quick open here, and I'll go to my UVC. Yeah, there we go. When I have a larger part file that I'm working on, one thing I can do is I can create stock models along the way. So as you can see in my file here, as I'm going through, I have various different relative stock models for my areas of machining. So what I machined my first operation versus along the way. Now, where this is handy is when I'm verifying, I can also reference these stock models to verify from, so I don't have to re-watch every time my entire part being roughed out. All I have to do is under my simulator options, rather than referencing from a stock setup, I can choose an individual stock model to reference from. So as I'm doing my, say my secondary setup, I can just say stock setup 2. And as I verify something, if I just click anything here to verify, what will end up happening for me is, as my verify window pops up here, you can see I'm automatically viewing from my model that's been left over. I'm not going from my very initial just square block or whatever the case may be. And I don't have to watch everything else being machined again. It's just automatically there for me. So that's another huge benefit of stock models, where I can go and I can reference individual times and areas, and those can also be utilized within my toolpaths. So something like an OptiRest toolpath. Within the parameters, I can create a stock model prior to, and under stock, I can say, hey, great, remachine or machine the rest of this material relative to that stock model I just made. So rather than relative to all previous operations or anything like that, I can just have it relative to that one operation. So that's really handy for something like our dynamic OptiRough toolpath, and various different things like that. Even the finishing toolpaths, super handy. Those are probably the 2 or 3 main reasons that I suggest utilizing stock models. I guess the last one I can mention and reference real quick is, do I have one at the end? No, I don't. But actually, I'll just grab this guy here. Oh yeah, because that's a fixture prep. So when I have my final part, a common thing that people do when they verify is they'll utilize the compare feature within verify to compare their machine part off the model. That's great, but it's only as accurate as your graphics really are. I don't hold it to a superb standard. So within my stock model, just know you also have the option of stock compare when creating stock models. So by utilizing stock compare, it'll give a more accurate representation of showing where you've gouged, where you've left material, where you've taken too much material, various different things like that, relative to your initial part that you would select. And I can go and I can specify various different tolerances to give me an accurate idea. So, be accurate within a thou. Or if it's not as critical a part or whatever that I need a thou, I can say, hey, be accurate within 5 thou, and it won't take nearly as long to generate. And then I can also specify if this is, after being roughed or anything like that. I can say, hey, I've left 50 thou or whatever the case may be. So that's a huge benefit to stock models. Yeah, so I hope that kind of answers that question for a lot of people. What other questions do we have, Drew?
One other question, and I think this kind of goes maybe back to the auto axis bounding box kind of thing. If I have a part imported into Mastercam in a random orientation in space away from the origin, is there a simple way for me to align it back to Mastercam work coordinate system without creating new planes?
Yes. So for that question, what I'm hearing and what I believe it's referring to is, I'm just going to open a lot more simple part, where let's just grab, let me grab my, actually not my bone plate, or whatever, I'll just grab this guy here. Um, we've got my optical mount. Don't save, don't care. So I'm just going to go ahead and just empty this file out essentially. Actually, let's just do it the easy way. All right, so conveniently, this part is essentially already at my origin or a new plane it looks like that I've created. Okay. So with my view, if anyone is working in either aerospace industry, I know automotive is the same, as well as anything nautical. What ends up happening is quite often you'll get a solid model, and when you import it in, it's way out in space. And not only is it out in space, but it's also orientated all kinds of stupid ways. So if I just go ahead and great. So I just take a look at my top view and fit my screen. I open up my file and here's how it comes in. Now I have a few different options for either moving this back to my origin or a couple of different options. Obviously, I can just create a new plane off this. You can utilize the bounding box to auto fit a feature to it. In this case, I'd probably utilize a rectangle, auto fit a cube to it. But if I just want to move this to my origin, of course you can just say move to origin. Yeah, and I'll just throw in that corner. However, that doesn't align it for me. So if I can just undo that there, one tool that I often use under my model prep is my disassemble feature. Now, what disassemble is actually designed for is if you have an assembled model come in, you can select that assembled model and it'll disassemble every piece to it and align those pieces to your origin, kind of separate it out side by side to the largest face. However, if I only have one part, what that's going to do for me is if I say disassemble, select my part, and I'll say move. If I just fit it to my origin, I can see it's automatically moved it to my origin for me, but it's also aligned it in the same process. So with essentially a single click, I've both moved to origin and aligned it, essentially only leaving out the only other step I would have is if I wanted this rotated a simple 90 degrees, or if I wanted my Z0 at the top here, I would just have to translate it down to that top point, making my life nice and easy. So in a single step, I've been able to move it from wherever the heck it was in space at whatever orientation to my orientation aligned nicely to the largest face of the part. So if you ever have that issue where you're opening up files and they're here, there, and everywhere, you can, of course, feel free to do that. What else do we got?
One last question, and then hopefully we'll open it up to a couple more questions from some of the attendees.
Yeah, and I do. So what was the last?
So when I installed 2021, it seems to be running slower than previous versions. Is there a reason for that, and is there anything I should do to help out with that?
Yeah. This is a question that we often get, probably mainly with 2020 and moving onward. So I've gotten this a lot with Mastercam 2020, a lot with Mastercam 2021. Essentially, a lot of what happens, unless you are a lot luckier than myself in previous companies that I've worked for while working in industry, I was not so lucky to have a super fantastic up-to-date computer. Where it was sitting around for a while. Maybe the processors were okay. They met standard, but not the best standard per se. Within our website, we have under the support tab. Not how-to tips. We have Mastercam system requirements. We have them listed here, where the recommended Windows 7, 8, or 10. Going forward, 7 is no longer going to be supported, so you do want to be on Windows 10 ideally. The big things, when you're throwing money at things, Having a processor, if you have a 2.4 gigahertz processor, that's okay. But having something a little stronger than that is certainly going to do you better. In past versions, Mastercam has only ran off single cores, so essentially just grab the strongest core possible and try and run off that. Now Mastercam is running off multi-core processing. So it's actually utilizing the better processors with the faster speeds. Memory is probably one of the other big things that you can throw money at. So simply updating, it doesn't cost a whole lot of money for customers who are, if you have 8 gigs of RAM or even 16, updating yourself to that 32 or honestly even 64 is going to do you a lot better. Will benefit you. But the other kind of last thing that I strongly suggest is your graphics cards. So if you have something like a Quadro card or whatever, you can have a great graphics card put into your system, but if you haven't updated the drivers in any specific length of time, you're using a great card with an old brain to it, and it's just not going to work that great. So constantly setting reminders on your system to, hey, if it's not doing it automatically, check for updates. I generally suggest to customers, update your graphics card drivers at least every 6 months. So if you throw a reminder in your calendar to check for updates twice a year, it takes all of maybe 5 minutes to download and install the latest driver for your card, and makes a world of difference. Another thing that in the past has been like simply having a solid state drive versus a hard drive. In the past, that's been an expensive upgrade. Now they have dropped drastically in price. Where simply, making sure you have that solid state drive really makes all the difference in terms of how long Mastercam is taking to open, various different things like that. It makes a huge difference. So get yourself a solid state drive. Make sure your graphics card drivers are up to date. And if anything, a lot of time companies will be hesitant to pour money because, graphics cards aren't cheap. For anyone that knows, memory is a lot cheaper and a lot more affordable. At least throw some money at your memory. Get yourself to the 32 or higher range there. And that will often help out with the speed of how Mastercam is working. Okay. If you are stuck with, you have what we'll call sub-ideal system that you're running on, and it's just not in the budget for the company to upgrade you anything right now, you do have the option of disabling your graphics acceleration. It's not always suggested, just because it is affecting the performance of Mastercam. But if I just head down here to my latest version here, Mastercam 2021, under the advanced configurations, you have graphics support and hardware acceleration for the current user or all users. You can, instead of enable, you can disable that. And essentially what you're telling Mastercam is, hey, just dumb down my graphics for me so that my processor isn't struggling nearly as hard to keep up with what my screen is trying to do. Often I'll suggest that to, like school boards and things like that who are running with, dare I say, integrated graphics cards, or even if it is a dedicated graphics card, one from, the Stone Ages type thing. So that's something that'll benefit those extreme customers. But otherwise, that's an extreme case. My main suggestion would be update your graphics card driver and maybe throw a little more money into your RAM. Okay. I do see, again, I'm just going to ask right now that you forgive me on the pronunciations, but we have one question I'm not going to try. How can we select a single edge in solid chaining now? Great question. So if I just grab this guy here, so being as I'm in here, I may as well just show. Again, just from when this is taking up a lot of the area, all I have to do now is right click and I can select hide, auto hide. And now that just minimizes it down until I drag my mouse over it. Otherwise, for single edge, great question, because you no longer have that single edge option. when I select edges, I'm just going to unselect my faces. I can now just go into any edge, and I'll just kind of grab this guy here. And if it's just a single edge I'm selecting, then I'm done. I can select, multiple areas. I can go ahead here as well, here as well. But you notice as I'm going, if I want to continue that along, it does also give me the option of my red and blue arrows. So for those unfamiliar, that's for your branch points. So that's for if I want to, it's always going to follow your red arrow. So if I can continue along, where it's going to go, very simple things like that. And if I'm heading the wrong direction, I can always adjust, and it will adjust accordingly. Or if I go back one, I can adjust and say, oops, I want that way. So for a single edge, you're essentially just selecting your edges there and just selecting the one edge at a time and being done with it. You can, of course, select your end chain in between if you'd like, but you don't have to. While selecting single edges, you can just go ahead and click all your single edges at a time. So that's how you can now do single edges in your solid shading now. Aside from that, I see one person requested the link for the webinar. Absolutely, we would love to do that. So again, as this is recorded, this will be available if any of your other coworkers, if you think it would benefit them to see kind of some of the new features and where and what they are, just let us know in the questions there. Just let us know to send you the link, and we'd be more than happy to. Otherwise, you can also just reach out to us, either support at inhousesolutions.com, or you can reach out to your sales representative, and they'd be more than happy to send you the link to this webinar as well. With that said, I don't see any more questions coming in. I'll give it kind of another minute or so. No, I don't see any more questions. So with that, I'll just kind of end it off. I just want to thank you guys. I know time is extremely valuable, so I just want to say thank you for sticking in with us and joining us. We really appreciate it, and we're always with, this was kind of a result as, just in case any of you are not aware, normally speaking, with the inclusion of your maintenance package that you are all on, you have available an update and consulting day with us. So normally what that looks like is you are able to come into our office, and essentially one of our techs, often myself, like I'll go through what's new in the newest version, and we'll go through, essentially if you have any parts that you want to bring in or anything like that, we'd go through that. Obviously with COVID, we're no longer able to do that right now. So this is our attempt and essentially still trying to provide the best support for you, trying to provide the best service for you while still letting you know everything that's new within the updates. So in case you do have other licenses available to you, we will be doing other webinars. This was just specific to Mill and Mill 3D. There will be other webinars coming that you can hold on for all the various other different licenses, whether it be lathe, multi-axis, or various different things like that. Lathe, multi-axis, mill turn, all the other licenses. We'll have webinars on to show what's new with them as well. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and we'll end it there. You guys enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I say the rest of your week as if you have much, but enjoy your weekend. Stay safe, and all the best from In-House Solutions. Take care, guys.